Katsushika Hokusai, Under the Wave off Kanagawa, also known as the Great Wave, from the series 36 Views of Mount Fuji, about 1830 to 31. This woodblock print, about 14 inches across and 10 inches high, depicts an enormous wave cresting over 3 boats on rough seas, with Mount Fuji visible far in the distance. The water takes up the bottom third of the composition, but the wave, entering from the left edge, curls under about an inch from the top of the print and fills the left half of the image. The water is streaked with shades of dark blue with heavy white spray at the crest. 2 long, low boats are visible in the bottom of the wave, mostly obscured by choppy water and spray. The front of each boat is pointed to the left, toward the crest of the wave. A crew of rowers is shown on each boat, appearing tiny in the enormous surf. Behind the primary wave, another similar boat is carried by a rolling wave on the right half of the image. The curved, pointy end partially covers the mountain in the background. Mount Fuji is rendered in the same dark blue as the water, with white snow covering about half of its surface. The sky is printed in a gray gradient, mostly pale, until a dark charcoal area around the mountain. This highlights the small amount of gray that appears on the boats, in an image where everything else, including the line work, is printed in blue. Japanese text appears in the upper left corner. Katsushika Hokusai, Fine Wind, Clear Weather, also known as Red Fuji, from the series 36 Views of Mount Fuji, about 1830 to 31. Approximately 14 inches across and 9.5 inches high, this landscape showing Mount Fuji is a woodblock print, which means the image was produced by transferring ink onto paper from a series of carved wooden blocks, resulting in a clear, precise image with a flat surface. A grainy texture is visible in larger solid-colored areas, imparted by both the surface of the wood and the application of ink to the block. In this landscape, Mount Fuji is shown in the distance with its peak positioned at the upper right third of the composition, a few inches from the top of the page. The mountain is dark brown at the peak, with thin, branching patches of bare off-white paper indicating snow. The slope spreads out diagonally on each side, cropped about halfway down on the right edge of the print. On the left side, it begins to flatten out, stretching to take up the full width of the image. The dark brown color at the peak fades to a lighter reddish brown, and below this, a thin strip of yellow-gray. At the base, the mountain is blue-green, and the left side is dotted with small dark teal triangular shapes, trees seen from a great distance. These marks are most dense along the bottom left edge, forming a nearly solid shape. They spread out toward the right in clusters, forming horizontal stripes that get shorter farther up the slope. Despite the apparent distance of the mountain from the viewer, it is the only part of the landscape that is visible. The peak is surrounded by a medium blue sky, marked by rows of short puffy clouds. These are close together on the viewer's left, near the bottom of the print, and gradually thicker slivers of blue sky are visible between the clouds, moving up the composition. A band of blue ink is overprinted at the top edge, adding a deeper blue tint over both the white clouds and the blue sky. The title of the work is written in Japanese in the upper left corner, outlined by a white box. Additional text appears beside it, printed over the sky. Totoya Hokke, Mount Fuji, from an untitled series of 3 Lucky Dreams, 1820s. This woodblock print depicts Mount Fuji. It measures approximately 7 inches across and 8 inches high, and the mountain takes up more than half of the composition, the peak rising to within an inch of the top of the print on the right half of the composition. The mountain extends out in a wide slope, so that it is cropped on both sides and the base is not visible. The peak is covered by a mottled gray-brown surface that extends downward and out in thin branching lines. Below this, the mountain's surface fades from the off-white of the paper into a pale, subdued teal color, gradually darkening to a nearly black green, with a brushy-looking border between colors. On the viewer's right, a series of tiny black hatch marks are clustered together in rows that travel up the mountain from the right edge of the print. A winding cloud-like form, in a streaky mix of coppery brown and pale blue, rises from behind the mountain near the middle of the left edge. The shape curves and undulates, moving right diagonally down the front of the mountain, getting wider as it moves toward the bottom center. 11 vertical lines of Japanese text are written in gray-black, level with the peak, on an otherwise off-white background. Yoshitomo Nara, White Fujiyama Ski Galinda, from the series In the Floating World, 1999. This print borrows its composition and lifts some visual elements directly from Hokusai's Fine Wind, Clear Weather. The artist painted and drew directly on a reproduction of Hokusai's work, then produced an edition of his own by making Xerox copies, including the one on view here. It measures 16 inches across and 11.5 inches high, and Mount Fuji occupies roughly half of the image. The mountain is painted over, shown as an all-white form, with a broad peak that slopes out quickly to spread across the full width of the print at the bottom. A cartoonish figure appears close to the viewer near the bottom of the slope, traveling down the mountain on blue skis with the yellow ski poles held out behind them. They have a large, round head with shaggy, bright yellow hair and large eyes, and they wear a crudely drawn rectangular pink dress. Short lines in blue and yellow show the path of their skis down the mountain, the only marks on the mountain surface. A snowman is situated on the far side of the skier from the viewer, near the left edge where the slope flattens out. It has a long, bright orange nose, round marks for eyes, buttons down the front, and a cylindrical yellow hat. The background uses the original cloud pattern from Hokusai's print, with rows of wide, puffy white clouds against a medium blue sky. Some of these shapes are extended in front of the mountain or over the border of the print on the left and right edges, drawn in pencil or with blue and yellow lines. Japanese text is written in pencil inside a white frame in the upper left corner, and there is additional writing across the center top with wide marker strokes. Katsushika Hokusai, The Story of Minamoto no Yoshitsune and Jorubi Hime, from the series Perspective Pictures, 1780s. 15 inches across and 10 inches high, this woodblock print depicts groups of figures in both an interior space and an outdoor landscape side by side. It is printed in a limited color palette, mostly pale yellow, green, and gray with red and purple accents on off-white paper. The print also features fine details and outlines in black. Nearly 2/3 of the composition is taken up by a building on the left side of the print. Simple vertical beams support the roof, mostly cropped out of the scene, and serve to subdivide multiple interior spaces. The entire structure is surrounded by a raised deck and follows the perimeter, and a low yellow fence runs along the bottom edge of the print. Figures sit and stand throughout, dressed in long kimonos in red, purple, and green. Inside, in the middle distance, 3 people are seated together on the floor. A woman in the center plays a koto, a long, low instrument that rests on the floor with its strings facing upright. Behind them are 2 more figures in the next room. One is shown in profile, facing the viewer's right, playing a hanging drum with round-headed drumsticks. On the outside of the building, a woman stands on the decking, positioned at the center of the composition. Another is seated beside her on the viewer's right. The fence separates the groups in the building from the foreground closest to the viewer. In front of the fence, the peak of a roof is shown in the bottom left corner, surrounded by trees. At the bottom right, 2 men kneel on either side of a man playing a flute. Another woman approaches them from the building, leaning over the fence with a lantern. The right half of the composition shows the landscape surrounding the building. 1 tall tree stands along the right edge of the print, cropped in half. A short bank leads to a body of water, which winds through flat land and low hills as it recedes. A waterfall marks the horizon. Several more figures, alone or in pairs, move through the landscape, gathered on the banks or crossing a low arch bridge. They appear very small compared to the foreground groups, suggesting that they are a much greater distance from the viewer. A column of Japanese text runs down the right side of the print, outside the border of the image in the margin. Attributed to Katsushika Hokusai. Album of miscellaneous sketches, including designs for artisans, about 1830s. This book is open to a spread that contains numerous highly detailed sketches. The spread measures 13 inches across and 9.5 inches high, and there are 3 wide rectangular drawings on each page, with a series of individual sketches of figures on a blank background along the bottom. The images are drawn in black ink on white paper, though some traces of red are visible, marking sketches underneath or serving as grid lines for planning. Each of the 6 drawings above include figures in groups of various sizes, but special attention is paid to the backgrounds and ornamental details, like elaborate frames and floral elements. Balance is emphasized through repeated and mirrored forms, so that even the subjects may be shown upside down or sideways in order to create an even composition. The sketches at the bottom of these pages are drawn with a lighter line, and each figure or small group stands alone against the blank ground. Some sit and smoke, recline, or play instruments in poses that are similar to ones above. Katsukawa Shunso, Scenes of Amusement in Summer, about 1790. This folding screen is one of a pair. It measures roughly 12.5 feet across and nearly 5.5 feet high, and it features an image painted in ink across all 6 of its paper panels. This includes a built environment in a larger landscape and 3 distinct groups of people gathered across it. The first 2 panels feature a small portion of a building. 4 women are gathered on a deck that wraps around the structure, and the interior space is visible behind them. One woman, who is reclining behind 2 other seated figures, rests her legs on the green floor mats inside while she leans forward onto the deck. She faces a woman who holds an open book, while another turns away toward the viewer's right. The fourth looks on, standing next to a thin post that supports the roofline. Each wears a kimono, as do the rest of the figures across the screen. The landscape around the building is sparse in some areas, rendered with smooth brushstrokes, and the ground and sky blend together with the same pale browns and grays. This allows features like small hills, stone pathways, and trees to crop up throughout. The central group is anchored by a tall tree in the foreground, closest to the viewer on the 4th panel. A lone figure moves toward the right edge on the 3rd panel, carrying a kettle and a teacup on a stand. She approaches a group of 4, seated or reclining on a raised platform. Their sandals are on the ground below, and they have 2 small trays with kettles and other dishes. A fence behind them partially obscures a low green hill in the background. The last 2 panels show a group gathered on a bank near a calm body of pale blue water. One crouches, holding a fishing pole, and looks back at a standing woman. Another woman stoops while a child raises a flower to her hair, and a third holds a very young child on her shoulder. A rocky outcropping and a gnarled tree mark the edge of the bank beyond the group, while irises and other small green plants grow out of the water. A low waterfall appears in the distance, near the upper right edge. Robert Kushner, White Cyclamen 1, 1999. This 3-foot by 3-foot square painting in oils and acrylics features an abstracted image of flowers. Color is applied in smooth gradients or swirled with others in marbled areas, and it drifts from the background to the foreground, so that the subject is defined primarily by thick outlines. The ground in this painting is a strip of warm purple along the bottom edge. Above, the top 3 quarters feature deep blues that shift from purple to green. Over this, thick white lines define the long, pointed petals of each flower in a cluster. These are open to varying degrees, some seeming to droop slightly while others remain upright, the center of the flower turned away from the viewer. Each stands on a thin, bright pink stalk, about the same height as the flower itself. Underneath, several more short stems send out small conical buds, the closed petals also outlined in white. The bottoms of the stalks are covered by leaves with serrated edges, shown with choppy green outlines over the purple ground. A strip of gold runs through the background, composed of small gold leaf squares applied over a red ground, so that a grid of very thin red lines remains. The shape bends in from the upper left and travels down the center of the painting. This shape does not cross the white or green outlines, so that it appears strictly in the background behind the subject. Katsushika Hokusai, The Mansion of the Plates, from the series 100 Ghost Stories, about 1831 to 32. This woodblock print shows the figure of a ghost emerging from a well. It measures 7.5 inches across and nearly 11 inches high. The figure has a human face, pale and angular, but her long black hair extends over a serpentine body made of overlapping blue and white patterned dinner plates. She is shown in profile facing the viewer's right, and her body curves from the top center of the image toward the left edge, then toward the center into the well. A thin plume of smoke emerges from the ghost's mouth, snaking upward toward the upper right corner of the print. Her gaze is directed upward toward the viewer's left. The well is surrounded by a rough wooden barricade, resembling a barrel, and it has several broken planks. Small, pale green leaves with thick blue veins wrap around the structure, visible at the bottom left, closest to the viewer, and sticking up from behind the well on the right. The top of the print is dark blue and fades to black on the bottom half of the composition. Japanese text appears in a small white frame in the upper left corner. Tycho Chandler, Blue Surge, 2023. This piece is a large-scale, three-dimensional installation that is mounted to the wall, measuring roughly 15 feet across and 5 feet high. It is composed of many individual monoprinted segments that have been arranged in a swirling wave-like mass, several layers deep. Each segment is made from a sheet of white Tyvek, a strong paper-like plastic, and features a row of cut-out scallop shapes printed in blue. The printing resembles marbled paper or shells, with strong stripes of blue and white moving together in arching motions. These are echoed by the overall form when segments are bunched together or pinned so that they stick out from the wall rather than laying flat. Marion Estes, Chemical Falls, 2016. This mixed media painting measures 2.5 feet across and 6 feet high. It depicts a steep, abstracted waterfall. The central undulating form is painted with horizontal streaks in shades of bright blue and purple. Its edges are irregular, covered partially by the land on either side, and it gets narrower at the bottom of the composition, drifting toward the right edge. At the top of the water, a primarily yellow circle shows a reflection of the sun, although it is not visible in the sky above. Instead, rows of wavy shapes in pink and orange are stacked under a strip of gold. Along the edges of the painting, cliff-like surfaces are collaged together out of a cotton quilting fabric. Each cutout shows the same series of scraggly trees in dark brown and gold against a mottled orange background. These overlap to create a dense landscape, and a few clusters of bright green leaves appear on either side, growing out of a rocky-looking surface. Over the top of the water, a bright multicolored form with vertical streaks cascades down the center of the image, entering from the top right. Yellows, pinks, oranges, and greens are included, cut from long irregular strips of spray-painted paper. Translucent white highlights, made directly on the finished canvas with spray paint, makes this area appear to glow or radiate. It appears to be part of the falls, even though it extends up above the water to the top edge of the painting.